Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got an exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. But before we jump right in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, drop a comment, and share it with your friends and family. Now, grab your seat and let's get into the story. He left me because I couldn't bear a child, but I returned years later with Triplet at his wedding. My name is Emily Carter. I am 38 years old. I live in Chicago now, but that wasn't always the case. A decade ago, I was married to a man I thought would be my forever, yet life had a cruel way of teaching me lessons I never asked for. When I married David, I believed I had everything a woman could want. He was tall, confident, and ambitious, the kind of man who walked into a room and drew attention without even trying. I was 27 when he slipped the ring on my finger, and I remember thinking that my life was about to be a fairy tale. We bought a small home in the suburbs of Boston, painted the kitchen yellow because I said it felt like sunshine, and planted roses in the backyard. Every corner of that house carried my dreams. But dreams have fragile roots when they depend on someone else's love. 2 years into our marriage, the questions began. Friends, neighbors, even his family at Thanksgiving, when are you two having kids? At first, David would laugh it off. We're just enjoying each other, he'd say. But in private, his voice started to change. The laughter disappeared, replaced with impatient sighs and restless nights staring at the ceiling. I went through test after test, procedure after procedure, my body poked and prodded under sterile white hospital lights. Every negative result was like another crack in my heart. Still, I kept faith. I prayed, I cried, I kept my smile plastered in public. I thought love meant weathering storms together. But one evening, after dinner, David placed his fork down and told me calmly, like he was reading lines off a script, "Emily, I can't do this anymore. You can't give me children. I filed the papers this morning." My world collapsed in that moment. I begged him, "David, we can try again, there are treatments, there are options." But he stood cold, almost relieved, as though he'd been waiting for this release. He said he wanted a family, and if I couldn't provide it, then he'd find someone who would. His words cut me deeper than any scalpel. The divorce process was humiliating. His lawyer spoke of me like I was defective, as if my worth began and ended with a womb that had failed its purpose. My parents, though supportive, lived in another state and couldn't shield me from the whispers of our neighbors. "Poor Emily," they'd say, pity laced with curiosity. I avoided the grocery store just to escape the stares. One evening, I stood alone in the empty house we once shared, the scent of fresh paint still clinging to the walls. He had taken his belongings, leaving behind nothing but silence and the faint echo of laughter that once filled the rooms. I walked from the bedroom to the kitchen, touching the counters, the doorknobs, as though saying goodbye to a body that no longer belonged to me. When I reached the backyard, the roses had withered, their petals brown and brittle, a mirror of what my marriage had become. With tears streaming down my face, I realized I had to leave Boston. The city carried too many ghosts of the life I'd lost. So I packed what little I had left, sold the house, and bought a one-way ticket to Chicago. It was a place where no one knew my story, no one would look at me with pity. The first year was brutal. I lived in a small apartment with peeling paint and thin walls that carried the sounds of strangers arguing and babies crying. I worked long hours at a marketing firm, keeping my head down, learning to breathe again. Every night, I returned to silence, curled up on my couch, and tried not to think about David. Yet the emptiness clawed at me. His betrayal wasn't just the loss of a marriage, it was the loss of the woman I thought I was. Still, something in me refused to die. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe resilience, but I refused to let his verdict define me. I joined a gym, not to sculpt my body but to reclaim it. I started therapy, where for the first time I admitted aloud, I feel broken. And slowly, piece by piece, I began stitching myself back together. But the nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I truly was barren, if I would ever know the weight of a child in my arms, or if my destiny was to wander through life alone, haunted by what I could not give. Then, one winter evening, I received a letter. It was from David's sister, Claire. We had been close during the marriage, and though she tried to respect boundaries, she couldn't stay silent. She told me David was already engaged to another woman, a younger one, someone his mother had chosen. Claire apologized for telling me, but she said I deserved to know. Reading those words, my chest burned. I thought of the nights I wept on the bathroom floor, the endless doctor's visits, the way he dismissed me like an expired lease. And now, he was building a new life, untouched by guilt, ready to parade down the aisle again. I folded the letter, placed it in a drawer, and stared out the window at the snow falling against the glass. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. Something inside me shifted that night. My story wasn't over, and it would not be written by the man who left me. I didn't know it then, but fate was preparing a twist so sharp it would one day take me back to him. Not broken, not barren, but carrying the life he once claimed I could never give. That was what I whispered to myself the morning I signed the lease on a slightly larger apartment in Chicago. The walls were freshly painted, the floors creaked with age, and the windows overlooked a noisy street filled with honking taxis and food trucks. To me, it was more than a place to sleep. It was the first sign that I was moving forward, no matter how slow the pace. Work became my anchor. I buried myself in campaigns and deadlines, proving to my boss and to myself that I was capable of more than what David had reduced me to. Every project completed was a small victory, a reminder that I was more than my womb. Yet even with progress, the ache never fully left. Late at night, I'd catch myself tracing invisible outlines on my stomach, wondering what it might feel like to carry a child. Therapy helped me untangle some of that longing. Dr. Mason, a woman with kind eyes and silver hair, often reminded me, "Your worth is not measured by motherhood." I nodded, but deep inside, I wanted to challenge her. Because the truth was, a part of me still yearned for it. Yearned to prove David wrong, to prove myself whole. It was during one of those sessions that Dr. Mason suggested something I'd never considered seriously before, medical intervention. "Emily, you've spent years believing what one man decided about you. Science has advanced. Options exist. You don't need a husband's permission to pursue them." The idea terrified me, but it also lit something inside. I started researching fertility treatments. The costs were staggering, the procedures invasive, but I found myself drawn to the possibility like a moth to flame. I picked up extra freelance work, saved every dollar I could, and after months of scrimping, I scheduled my first consultation. Walking into the clinic that spring was like stepping into another world. White walls, humming machines, nurses moving with quiet efficiency, it all felt surreal. The doctor, a warm man named Dr. Patel, listened as I recounted my history. He didn't dismiss me, didn't brand me barren. Instead, he spoke of chances, percentages, and hope. For the first time in years, I felt seen. The treatments were grueling. Injections, ultrasounds, blood tests. My body felt like a battlefield, bruised and tired. There were days I wanted to give up, days I questioned whether I was chasing a dream too fragile to hold. Yet each morning, I rose, whispered, new beginnings, and pressed forward. Then came the phone call. I was at work, hunched over spreadsheets, when my cell buzzed. "Emily," Dr. Patel said, his voice tinged with excitement, "You're pregnant." Pregnant. I sank into my chair, tears streaming freely, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold the phone. For a moment, the office noise faded, the ringing phones, the chatter, the clack of keyboards, it all dissolved into silence. All I heard was that single word echoing in my head. Pregnant. The months that followed were a blur of cravings, morning sickness, and fear that it was too good to be true. At every appointment, I held my breath until I heard the steady thump-thump-thump of tiny heartbeats. And not just one, 3. Triplets. My doctor smiled as he showed me the scan. "It looks like fate decided to give you abundance." Abundance. After years of emptiness, I was now carrying 3 lives inside me. I laughed and cried all in the same breath, overwhelmed by the sheer poetry of it. The woman David had discarded as worthless was about to bring 3 souls into the world. Pregnancy wasn't easy. My body ached constantly, my feet swelled, and sleep became a luxury. Yet every kick, every flutter reminded me that I was no longer broken. I was a vessel of life. My parents flew in to help during the final months, their excitement washing away the years of quiet sorrow they'd carried for me. My mother would place her hand on my belly and whisper, "You are stronger than you know." The day of their birth is etched in me like scripture. A cold December morning, the hospital lights glaring, my breaths shallow and desperate. Hours of labor ended with cries that split the air. 3 distinct voices announcing themselves to the world. 2 boys and a girl. I named them Ethan, Noah, and Grace. My miracles. My proof. Motherhood reshaped me. Nights became endless cycles of feeding and changing, my once quiet apartment now alive with wails and laughter. Exhaustion clung to me, but joy outweighed it. Holding them in my arms, I understood something profound. David hadn't broken me. He had freed me to find a life greater than the one I'd imagined. Years passed quickly. The children grew, their personalities blooming in ways that amazed me daily. Ethan, the leader, always protective of his siblings. Noah, the dreamer, his head often lost in books. Grace, fiery and bold, her laughter filling every corner of the house. They became my world, my redemption. I thought often of David, though not with longing anymore. Curiosity, perhaps. Wondering if he ever thought of me, if he ever regretted throwing me aside. Chicago had given me a new name, a new life, but part of me wanted him to see. To see the life I had created, the family I had become. Then, one Sunday afternoon, as I folded laundry while the kids argued over cartoons, I received a message from Claire. Her words stunned me. "Emily, I don't know if you care, but David is getting married next month. It's going to be a big wedding here in Boston." I froze. My heart pounded, memories rushing back like a tidal wave. He had left me broken, branded me barren, and now, years later, he was walking down the aisle again. But this time, I was not the woman he abandoned. I was Emily, mother of triplets. I sat quietly for a long time, listening to the laughter of my children in the background. A strange calm washed over me. Perhaps fate was giving me a chance, not for revenge, but for closure. To walk back into the world he once cast me out of, not empty, not ashamed, but whole. Life restores what pain steals. Patience blooms miracles. Believe in tomorrow, nurture resilience, and trust that your story still unfolds beautifully. The email sat open on my laptop for nearly an hour before I responded to Claire. My fingers hovered above the keys, trembling with indecision. She had written simply, "David's wedding is on the 23rd. If you want to come, I'll make sure you get in." She hadn't asked why I would want to attend, but her tone suggested she already knew. That night, after the children had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea. The steam curled into the air as I thought about the woman I used to be, the girl who had walked away from Boston broken and hollow. Now, almost a decade later, I was a mother of 3 remarkable children, smart, spirited, and mine. I wasn't going back for vengeance, though a part of me admitted the thought of David's stunned face gave me a certain satisfaction. I was going for closure, to prove to myself that I had survived him. Telling the kids about the trip wasn't difficult. "We're going to Boston for a few days," I said casually one morning while they munched on cereal. Grace's eyes lit up. "Is it like a vacation?" she asked, milk dripping down her chin. "Something like that," I smiled. "We'll get to see where I used to live." The weeks leading up to the trip were a whirlwind of planning. Packing bags, arranging time off work, making sure the kids' school assignments were covered. Every detail mattered. It wasn't just a trip. It was a return to the city where my heart had once shattered. The day we boarded the plane, I felt a strange weight in my chest. The children buzzed with excitement, pointing out the clouds through the windows, their laughter a balm to my nerves. But as the plane descended, the Boston skyline came into view, and I felt the air tighten around me. Memories rushed back, the yellow kitchen, the backyard roses, the night David told me I wasn't enough. Claire met us at the airport. She had aged gracefully, streaks of silver in her dark hair, her smile warm and genuine. When she hugged me, I felt tears prick my eyes. "Emily," she whispered, "you look incredible. And these must be the famous triplets." The children giggled shyly as she knelt to greet them. "Your mom was one of the strongest women I ever knew," she told them softly. I swallowed hard, grateful for her kindness. We stayed in a modest hotel downtown. The city had changed, new restaurants, taller buildings, but the ghosts remained. Walking through familiar streets was like peeling open an old wound. Yet every time I felt my chest tighten, Ethan would grab my hand, or Noah would ask a curious question, or Grace would skip ahead laughing, and the pain dissolved into pride. The night before the wedding, I sat by the window of the hotel room, staring out at the twinkling lights. My children slept peacefully in the beds behind me, their faces innocent, untouched by the scars of my past. I wondered if David had any idea what tomorrow would bring. Did he still think of me as barren, incapable, less than a woman? Did he ever regret? The thought almost made me laugh. Regret was his to carry. Triumph was mine. Morning came quickly. The hotel buzzed with activity as the kids argued about ties and hair bows. "Mom, do we have to wear matching outfits?" Noah groaned. I smiled at his exasperation. "Yes, sweetheart. Today is important." I had chosen elegant navy blue outfits for all three, simple but striking. I wore a pale blue dress, nothing extravagant, but it framed me with quiet confidence. Claire had arranged everything. We would arrive discreetly, blending into the guests until the right moment. She seemed almost as nervous as I was. "Are you sure about this?" she asked as we drove toward the grand church. I nodded. "I'm not here to cause a scene," I told her. "I just need him to see." The church loomed tall and beautiful, adorned with flowers and filled with the murmur of guests. My heart pounded as I stepped inside with the children. The air smelled of roses and polished wood, the sound of the organ faint in the background. My eyes swept the room, landing on the altar. There he was. David. Older, a little heavier, his hair flecked with grey, but unmistakably him. He stood beside his bride, a young woman with soft curls and a nervous smile. My stomach tightened, but I held my head high. I wasn't that trembling girl anymore. I was a woman reborn. The children clung to my sides as we moved quietly into the pews near the front, unnoticed at first. My hands shook as I adjusted Grace's bow, pretending calm. I could feel Claire's steady gaze on me, her silent reassurance. Then, in a moment that felt suspended in time, David's eyes scanned the crowd. He looked past faces, pausing briefly, before his gaze landed on me. His expression froze. For a second, he seemed unsure if he was seeing a ghost. Then his eyes dropped to the three children beside me, their resemblance to him impossible to ignore. Noah's sharp jaw, Ethan's hazel eyes, Grace's smile that mirrored mine. The color drained from his face. My chest swelled, not with anger, but with an overwhelming sense of victory. I had returned not as the woman he discarded, but as the mother he swore I could never be. I didn't move, didn't speak. I simply held his gaze, my children nestled close, my silence saying everything words never could. The murmur inside the church grew faint as David's eyes locked onto mine. For a moment, I thought he might faint. His lips parted, but no sound came, his gaze darting from me to the children, then back to me again. I could see the calculation in his mind, the disbelief battling with recognition. The guests remained oblivious, chatting softly, adjusting programs, unaware that the air between us had shifted into something electric. I felt Grace squeeze my hand. "Mom," she whispered, "why is that man staring at us?" Her innocent question sliced through the tension. I leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "Because he knows us, sweetheart." The bride, a woman named Hannah, noticed his distraction. She tugged gently at his arm, her smile faltering. "David?" she asked, her voice low but audible in the microphone. The guests stirred, sensing something amiss. David didn't answer. He was still staring. Then, almost instinctively, he stepped forward, breaking from his position at the altar. A ripple of whispers moved through the pews as heads turned to follow his line of sight. When his bride realized what he was staring at, she turned too. Confusion spread across her face, then discomfort, as if she suddenly realized this was not just a wedding but a battlefield of unresolved history. I remained seated, calm, my children pressed against me like anchors. Claire, beside us, reached for my arm, her voice steady. "Emily, whatever happens, you've already won." David reached the edge of the aisle, his eyes wide, his breath uneven. "Emily." His voice cracked. The church erupted in gasps. Emily, what, who, his words stumbled. He gestured toward the children, his hand trembling. Are they? I rose slowly, smoothing the folds of my dress, my spine straight. Every eye was on me now, the weight of the entire congregation pressing down. I looked at him, this man who had once stripped me of dignity, and I felt no fear. These, I said softly, but my voice carried, are my children. My triplets. Gasps. Whispers. A few guests covered their mouths. Someone muttered, triplets. David staggered back a step as though struck. His face flushed crimson, then pale. He glanced at Hannah, whose expression shifted from confusion to horror. You told me she couldn't have children, she said loudly, her voice echoing through the church. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. I was wrong, David croaked, still staring at the children, disbelief etched in every line of his face. My sons stared back at him curiously, unaware of the storm their very existence had unleashed. Grace clutched my hand tighter, her small fingers steadying me in a way I hadn't expected. I stepped closer, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. You left me because you said I was broken, I said, my voice calm, steady. But life had other plans. I wasn't barren, David. I was just free from you. The crowd stirred again. Some nodded, others whispered to one another, the scandal spreading like wildfire. The bride stood frozen, her bouquet trembling in her hands. You lied to me, she hissed at David, her voice sharp. Hannah, I didn't know, David stammered, panic rising in his voice. But his words no longer mattered. The ceremony was unraveling. The pastor cleared his throat nervously, uncertain whether to continue, while family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. For me, it wasn't chaos. It was clarity. The man who had branded me barren was now exposed before everyone he loved. My silence had spoken louder than any accusation ever could. I didn't linger. I turned to my children, smiling. Come on, I said softly. We've seen enough. We walked down the aisle together, the three of them holding on to me like little soldiers. The church doors opened wide, and sunlight poured in, warm and liberating. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The sound of voices behind us, shocked, angry, confused, was enough to know that the wedding had crumbled under the weight of truth. Outside, the air was crisp, the city alive with car horns and distant chatter. My children laughed as they skipped down the steps, unaware of the storm they had just walked through. To them, it was just another outing, another adventure with their mom. Claire caught up to us, her face flushed with both worry and admiration. Emily, she said breathlessly, I've never seen anything like that. You walked in with more power than anyone in that room. I smiled faintly, adjusting Grace's bow. It wasn't about power, I whispered. It was about closure. We climbed into the car waiting at the curb. As the driver pulled away, I allowed myself one final glance at the church in the rearview mirror. The doors were still open, guests spilling out, confusion painted across their faces. Somewhere inside, David stood surrounded by the wreckage of a wedding that would never be completed. I turned my gaze forward. My children were chattering about the snacks they wanted, their laughter filling the car like music. For the first time in years, I felt completely free, not defined by what I had lost, but by what I had gained. And as Boston faded behind me, I whispered to myself, new beginnings, always. Those words circled my mind as the plane lifted off from Boston, carrying me and my children back to Chicago. Ethan pressed his face against the window, marveling at the shrinking skyline, while Noah scribbled in his notebook and Grace hummed softly to herself. To them, it had been just another trip, but to me, it was the final chapter of a story I'd once thought would define me forever. I glanced at their faces, so full of light, and felt something inside me settle. For years, I had carried the weight of David's rejection, the shame, the whispers, the cruel branding of being barren. I thought I had moved past it, but deep inside, a part of me had still been tethered to that wound. Walking into his wedding with my children had cut the tether clean. I no longer felt his shadow pressing against my future. Back in Chicago, life resumed with its comforting rhythm. School mornings filled with the chaos of missing shoes and hurried breakfasts. Evenings spent helping with homework, cooking dinners that never pleased all three palates, and falling asleep to the hum of laughter and sibling squabbles. Ordinary days, yet sacred in their ordinariness. Each one reminded me of how far I had come. Friends often asked why I had gone to the wedding at all. Why give him that much of your energy? One colleague asked over coffee. I smiled, stirring cream into my cup. Because sometimes closure isn't quiet. Sometimes you need to walk back into the fire to prove it no longer burns. She nodded slowly, as if realizing the truth in my words. I didn't keep in touch with Claire after the wedding, though she sent one last message a few weeks later, his devastated. The marriage never happened. I hope you're at peace now. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. My life was no longer about him or his regrets. Instead, I poured myself into raising the children. Ethan developed a fascination with science, asking endless questions about the stars. Noah's love for stories blossomed into short tales he proudly read aloud at dinner. Grace, bold as ever, decided she wanted to be a dancer and twirled through the apartment until the neighbors downstairs complained. Their lives unfolded like a garden, each blooming in its own way, and I tended them with everything I had. Some nights, after they had gone to bed, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the city lights flicker. I thought about the woman I used to be, the young bride painting her kitchen yellow, praying for roses to bloom in a yard that never flourished. That woman had believed her value rested in one man's approval. I wanted to reach back through time and tell her, hold on. You'll lose everything, but what you gain will be greater. Healing, I learned, wasn't a single moment. It was a series of choices. Choosing to wake up when grief told me to stay in bed. Choosing to believe in medicine when hope felt foolish. Choosing to face the man who had broken me, not for revenge, but for myself. And choosing, every day since, to build a life filled with laughter, resilience, and love that multiplied by 3. Sometimes strangers ask if I regret what happened, if I wish David had stayed. My answer is always the same. If he had stayed, I would never have known the strength I carry now. And I would never have met Ethan, Noah, and Grace. The truth is, I am grateful, for the pain, for the rejection, for the forced beginning again. Because all of it led me here. To nights filled with giggles and bedtime stories. To mornings when little arms wrap around my neck and voices call me Mom. To a life beyond him, and far richer than I ever imagined. One Saturday afternoon, as the kids and I walked through the park, Grace twirling ahead, Noah reciting a story he had written, and Ethan peppering me with questions about the universe, I felt a rush of quiet joy. The kind of joy that doesn't shout but settles deep in your bones. I realized then that my life wasn't a tale of abandonment or betrayal. It was a story of renewal. I had been discarded, yes. But I had risen again, not in spite of that, but because of it. My children were not just proof of what I could give. They were proof of what love, faith, and resilience could create from ashes. And so, as the sun dipped behind the Chicago skyline that evening, I smiled, holding their small hands in mine. The past no longer bound me. My story belonged to me, and it was still being written, bright, beautiful, and free. Thank you for watching. See you in our next video.